fat, when you eat fat, it's basically broken down in your intestines and absorbed and goes into these chylomicrons, and it ends up going pretty much directly to your fat cells. So every time you eat fat, it's a very slow process. It has to basically slowly absorb through the wall of your small intestine, get packaged into chylomicrons. It gets dumped out into your lymphatic duct and your lymphatics. Your thoracic duct and your lymphatics. It ends up going to the liver and getting repackaged. It ends up in your fat cells finally like 12 hours later. It's very slow. It's very passive. It doesn't change your body's metabolism or your insulin levels much at all. And it's kind of just passively happening in the background. But basically, almost every bit of fat you eat is just immediately passively stored in your fat cells to be released later as free fatty acids. So free fatty acids, non-esterified fatty acids, one of the major fuels in your bloodstream, is only released from your adipocytes. So like basically you eat the fat, it's immediately stored in your fat cells, and then it's slowly released later as these non-esterified fatty acids bound to albumin, and that's how you run your body off of these fats, but they're only released from your adipocyte. It's such a slow process that you don't really feel it, like it's not giving you a ton of immediate satiety, it's not improving your performance, it's sort of background, it's sort of passive. And statistically speaking, about 99% of all the fat in your fat cells came from dietary fat. Basically, you eat fat, gets stored as fat. Refined fat has horrible satiety per calorie. It's tons of calories with very little satiety. We have studies in every animal on the planet. If you add refined fat to their diet, they will just slowly, passively, immediately get fatter. We have studies in humans, monkeys, pigs, rats, mice. You pour oil on their feed, and just adding a refined fat that adds calories with no satiety, and they will immediately passively get fatter. This is literally how we create obesity in rats and mice for research in rodent models. Carbs and fats have two totally different storage compartments. Fat is not water soluble and is only stored basically in your fat cells. And then carbs are water soluble and have to be stored as glycogen in your liver and your muscles. And when you eat carbs, like if you're not eating any carbs, you're burning pretty much all fat, mostly fat. As soon as you eat carbohydrate, you're just smoothly displacing fat oxidation with carbohydrate oxidation isocalorically. And then when the carbs are all gone, you smoothly go back to burning fat. It's really like just this sort of smooth gradient where eating more carbs, you're burning more carbs and less fat. Eating less carbs, you're burning more fat again. And that's just how the system works. So the problem with refined carbs is they have horrible satiety per calorie. And so if you eat a bunch of refined carbs, you're starving 3 hours later. You didn't get protein, you didn't get minerals, you didn't get all these things you need. And they have a really high caloric density. So like your breakfast cereal, your blood sugar goes way up, 3 hours later goes way down, you're hypoglycemic, you're starving, you're eating more. But refined fat is really not much better. Now, the thing that's better about refined fat is you won't get the glycemic excursion and then the fall that makes you feel hypoglycemic 3 hours later. So you're just kind of like this, but you're just passively getting fatter and you got no satiety at all. So refined carbs are really terrible for satiety per calorie, but refined fat is pretty bad too. The problem is when you have kidney damage, you spill protein in your urine. And so doctors will use the amount of protein in your urine to see how bad your kidney damage is. And then also if you eat a lot of protein, you can have more protein in your urine, even though it's not harming your kidneys. So somehow doctors got to this point where we're like, protein gives you protein in your urine, kidney damage gives you protein in your urine, protein gives you kidney damage. Yeah, it's just like, but it's completely fraudulently wrong. Now we have a meta-analysis that shows that higher protein diets are actually protective against kidney damage. They're awesome for your kidneys. Awesome. If you eat tons of protein, your kidney literally gets larger and stronger and your glomerular filtration rate goes up. It's like a bodybuilder doing curls all day long. It's like your bicep gets bigger. Right. And yes, and blood urea nitrogen will always go up on higher protein diets, but it's not harming you at all. And so some doctors are like, ooh, that could be bad. But yeah, it's just completely not evidence-based. So there is no evidence that high protein diets harm your kidneys at all. And then to take it one step further, like most nephrologists will recommend some amount of protein restriction for people who have known existing kidney damage. And even that's not evidence-based. So the vast majority of people with bad kidneys don't benefit from protein restriction. We have these huge meta-analyses on protein restriction in the setting of chronic kidney disease. And like only 5% of chronic kidney disease, if you have this rare primary glomerulonephritis, like a primary glomerular disease, which is super rare, protein restriction maybe helps it a little bit, but only in men and not in women. And it was like 1%. And the studies that showed this were deeply flawed. And then we have just a mountain of other evidence in people who have the more common kinds of kidney failure, diabetes, and high blood pressure. None of these people have ever been shown to benefit from protein restriction at all. So like if you have diabetes and diabetic nephropathy and your kidney functions decrease, you actually don't benefit from protein restriction. And doctors are still recommending protein restriction, even though it's not evidence-based. So this is definitely a huge problem. The thing that triggers mTOR the most is being over fat and have chronically high insulin levels. You know what I'm saying? So if I eat, let's say I eat twice as much protein as I did before, and I'm way thinner, I'm actually going to get less area under the curve mTOR stimulation because I'm leaner. All the fuels in my bloodstream are always lower 24 hours a day. My fasting insulin's way lower. I have patients who are bodybuilders, their fasting insulin levels are 1. Their triglycerides are a 30. Their A1C is a 4.0. Like the fuels in their bloodstream are so low. Their mTOR signaling is low, but they're eating, 200 grams of protein a day instead of 100 grams of protein a day. Well, who cares? Someone over here eating 100 grams of protein a day could be, 100 pounds overweight, and their fasting insulin's 50, and their blood sugar is too high, and their triglycerides are, 300, and they're just basically awash with energy toxicity. Insulin is chronically 1 or 2 orders of magnitude higher. And it's because they're eating less protein, they have less satiety per calorie, and they're constantly overeating calories, and they're just fatter 24/7, 365 with more fuels in their bloodstream. So like that, the whole idea doesn't even make sense. If you can eat a little bit more protein and be thinner, your mTOR signaling is actually much, much lower than someone who's like worried about how much protein they're eating. So it's completely mind-blowingly ridiculous. Mechanically, all these carbon atoms have to go somewhere. And when you eat fat, the carbons literally end up in your fat cells. And when you eat glucose, they literally end up in your liver and muscles. And then when any of that's burned, you exhale the carbon atoms. And you can literally just count all the carbons and see where everything goes. Here's the deal with insulin, right? Your entire body is just poised to melt down every bit of tissue you have into energy and flood your bloodstream with it for emergency use. So like glucagon is like this lead foot on the accelerator, where if insulin's not there to stop it, you'll just literally have wide open lipolysis, flood your bloodstream with fatty acids, flood your bloodstream with glucose from stored glycogen. Like every tissue in your body will break down catabolism and flood your bloodstream with energy without insulin. There are norepinephrine, epinephrine, cortisol, every single one of these hormones will break down every tissue in your body, flood your bloodstream with energy, and you've got tons of energy. And the only thing holding that back is insulin, right? So like look at a type 1 diabetic. They don't have insulin. They're melting down their entire body into energy. They've got, the free fatty acids in their bloodstream is off the charts. They have wide open lipolysis. They've dumped all their glycogen into glucose, ketones. Every fuel is maxed out in the bloodstream. You give them insulin and all that stops, right? Like you're sitting there right now in a fasted state, and the only reason the fatty acids in your bloodstream aren't off the charts is because your pancreas is constantly monitoring the fuels in your bloodstream. And if the fatty acids go up a little too high, insulin also goes up and tamps that back down. It's like a very sensitive thermostat that's constantly monitoring. Your pancreas is a fuel pressure sensor, and it's monitoring the fuels in your bloodstream and keeping them down by suppressing lipolysis, right? And so what ends up happening is that, your insulin is just trying to keep the fuels out of the bloodstream by keeping them in your cells. And then as you get fatter and fatter, like let's say I gain 100 pounds, I eat 100 pounds of butter and I gain 100 pounds. Now all my fat cells are too full. They don't want any more fat. So the fat is just circulating in my bloodstream, and my pancreas is just dumping out insulin, trying to clear it. but none of the cells want it. And then all my muscle cells are full of fat, and now they don't want glucose either. And so all these fuels are really high in my bloodstream. And insulin gets higher and higher and higher, but none of the cells are listening to it. So I just have too much fuel in my bloodstream. So chronically high insulin is just a sign of energy toxicity. It just means you have way too much fuel in your bloodstream, which means you have way too much fuel in your cells, and it's the whole thing backs up. And so the high insulin itself isn't really the problem. It's just a marker for the actual problem, which is energy toxicity. Too many fuels in your bloodstream, and then too many fuels in your cells. At every step in the fattening process, the fuels in your bloodstream are higher as you're getting fatter than they would be in a thin person who's not getting fatter. If someone's eating a really high satiety per calorie diet, so they're super thin and they're not getting fatter, all of their fuels in the bloodstream will be lower than someone who's actively getting fatter or is too fat or diabetic. Glucose will be higher in the fattening person. Triglycerides, free fatty acids, every fuel at all times will be higher in the bloodstream because insulin's just reacting to those fuels in the bloodstream. The reason people get fatter is because they're eating foods with low satiety per calorie. If I eat a food that has tons of satiety, it's got protein, minerals, micronutrients, and only 1 calorie, I'm going to have amazing results because I have ridiculous high satiety per calorie. And then if you're just eating like sugar and oil, your satiety per calorie is, sub-zero. It's like completely horrible. You're going to eat 1 billion calories and you're just going to get fatter and fatter and fatter. And we have these studies in animal models. You give them refined carbs and refined fats and they just gain 1 billion pounds. And so it really comes down to satiety per calorie, which is destroyed by refined carbs and refined fats, either one, or especially both. And that makes you overeat, and then your insulin's high. It's not the other way around. It's not like, I ate carbs and then my insulin shot up and that made me internally starving. It's actually, no one's ever documented this internal starvation part with low fuels in the bloodstream. That's never been documented because it doesn't exist. If someone's a type 2 diabetic, if you drink a whole gallon of heavy cream, right? Tomorrow morning, 12 hours later, you're going to have the highest fasting blood sugar you've ever seen. It's like when you eat all this fat, it slowly, passively goes into your fat cells, enlarges them all. You're slightly fatter, you're slightly more insulin resistant. Your fasting insulin has to go up just to try to hold it back out of your bloodstream. And then your sugar has to go up too because you don't have any place for any energy to go. And so fat is basically eventually isocalorically raising your insulin just as much as carbs are, but it's raising basal insulin. Carbs raise glucose and insulin immediately, and then it goes back down. Fat just raises your basal insulin because now you're fatter and you're more insulin resistant. Yeah, if you could actually see your basal creeping up 12 hours later where you're slightly fatter and slightly more insulin resistant, or if you had a glucometer that showed you your triglycerides, because you drink your heavy cream, your oil, your triglycerides are going to do this 4 times higher thing or more if you're over fat. I mean, I've seen extreme triglyceride excursions in people who are eating a lot of fat. We get these crazy numbers in the clinic. If you had a sensor that showed you your free fatty acids and your insulin and your triglycerides at all these time points, you'd realize, oh, hey, when I eat refined fat, the next morning I'm way worse metabolically. Do a thought experiment where right now you eat 100 pounds of butter, right? And tomorrow morning, 12 hours later, every fat cell in your body is expanded, right? Now all your cells are really refusing glucose, right? Your triglycerides are going to be higher because the fat cells don't want fat. Your muscle cells are filled with fat, so they don't want glucose. All your cells are in energy refusal mode, and then your blood sugar is going to be way higher. Your insulin is going to be higher because it's trying to get the fuels out of the bloodstream, but it can't. All your cells are full. Everything goes up, right? And so that's how fat makes you fatter and more insulin resistant. It's just such a slow process. It's really showing up, 12 hours down the road. So it's very confusing to a lot of type 2 diabetics. They're like, man, I never eat carbs, but my fasting sugar is, 150. What the hell? It's literally how many grams of fat you ate the day before, full stop. Exactly. That's a beautiful point. Like most people hit, diabetic range glucose when they're doing maximum intensity exercise. And that's not harmful and that's not bad for you. And these spikes in glucose are not necessarily that terrible. And what you're not seeing is your giant spike in triglycerides when you ate all that fat. Like if people could literally see that, they would be like, oh, hey, refined carb, refined fat, both doing crazy stuff to the fuels in my bloodstream, both have horrible satiety per calorie. Both are not helping my body composition. Maybe I should eat some protein instead. Like, for example, let's say you're a diabetic, but you do everything right. You're just eating lean protein, super high satiety per calorie. You're shaving off grams of carbs and fat. You're exercising, you're losing weight. You will steadily see your fasting blood sugar get lower and lower and lower and lower and lower. That will happen. There might be blips, there's up and downs. It's never linear. You know, there'll be days where your cortisol stresses you out and it'll be higher and you'll be like, I don't know what happened. But like if you zoom way out and look at the trend over weeks and months and years, you will steadily have a lower fasting blood sugar if you're doing all the right stuff. And that's higher satiety per calorie diet, which is usually way more protein and way less refined carbs and fats, and exercise to deplete intramuscular triglycerides and stuff like that. Just sleep deprivation will immediately increase insulin resistance and cortisol and stress and all these things. So there are all these other factors. But it's true that if you're doing everything right over time, you should see your fasting blood sugar go down if it's abnormally high. So like we're famous in the low carbosphere by saying that humans never have to eat any glucose ever. Like you can literally eat zero carbs. You never need carbs. You never need glucose. Right. Okay, that's true. There are a lot of things about fat that's actually also true for. Like the requirement for saturated fat in the human diet is absolutely zero. You can literally make every bit of saturated fat you need on your own. You would be fine if you never ate any saturated fat. The amount of cholesterol that humans require in their diet is zero. You literally never have to eat cholesterol. So you can manufacture your own saturated fat and cholesterol, just like you can manufacture your own glucose. Now, a lot of low carbers are like, well, that's not optimal. And yeah, it's probably not optimal, but it's probably not optimal to never eat any carbs at all either. Like these are both on a U-shaped curve. But the point is, you really don't need a ton of fat. Like the amount of essential fatty acids that humans require in their diet, it's under 10 grams a day. I mean, it's extremely small. And when we do these protein-sparing modified fast liquid diets for pre-bariatric surgery patients, I mean, sometimes there will be as few as 10 grams of fat in these formulations. Like you probably want about 10 grams of fat so you don't get gallstones and so you have your essential fatty acids. And I don't think that anyone wants to go that low indefinitely, but for short periods of time, you can certainly survive on 10 grams of fat. I would say that your average person for any kind of length of time probably does not want to go below about 30 grams of fat per day. And if you look at bodybuilders doing show prep, they're very loath to go below 30 grams of fat a day. And they're typically never going below 20% of calories from fat, and maybe 30% of calories from fat. So you always want some fat around. And in fact, if you go way too low in fat, you start getting like some major negative health impact. Your testosterone goes down and your energy goes down and a lot of stuff like that. So for most people, I'm like, okay, you definitely need at least 20 or 30% of your calories and at least 30 grams of fat. But you know, it's actually, if you have tons of fat in your body, you can get away with these fairly low amounts of fat indefinitely because you already have a lot of fat. I'm not saying like don't eat any fat, but I'm saying a lot of people can really cut back without any problem.
We're on the same page when it comes to this extended fasting. We don't like it because you're going to lose muscle mass. Whether you want to believe it or not, it happens.
Right.
And so we are more of, hey, let's hit our protein goal so it at least, stave off that muscle, maintain muscle, and you get your nutrients in because of, how nutrient dense the animal proteins are. And someone made a comment. She's like, I'm a trainer, and when I have my athletes do protein sparing modified fast days, they do terrible. We're like, why would you have a lean athlete do a protein sparing modified fast day?
Right.
Protein sparing modified fast
are dangerous.
It's dangerous. But the same people say,
don't eat for 3 days.
If you want to do a 3-day fast, that's fine.
We're saying,
yeah, that's completely ridiculous.
We're saying at least hit your minimum for protein and enough fat for your gallbladder and all of that. And a lot of people are like, even someone here is saying, why don't you speak to autophagy? And we're like, well, work out. That's better for it.
Yeah, it's way better for it. Yeah, absolutely. Well, okay, first of all, autophagy is honestly a totally BS buzzword that has no actual real meaning. Like, no one can actually measure this. Most of the studies that were referencing this were done outside of the body in extraordinarily artificial conditions with extraordinarily artificial measurement systems. And there's really, like, nobody really knows what autophagy is. You can't really tell when you're doing it. This is like, it's almost purely theoretical. So, but it really comes down to mTOR signaling, and it comes down to like either you're hypocaloric or hypocaloric. If you got plenty of energy or not enough energy. And the idea is that you kind of want to balance out the times when there's too much energy with times when there's not enough energy. And things that reduce energy availability theoretically are driving this autophagy process. And that's under eating calories or expending more calories. So you can either do it with just eating less calories, eating higher satiety per calorie foods, so you're eating less calories, exercising more to expend more energy. Anytime you're in a low energy state, you're going to theoretically be driving this process forward. I'm not a huge fan of like extreme protein sparing modified fast or extreme extended fast or extremely low calorie or 100% protein, 0% fat. I don't like any of that. I think everybody should eat now the way they're going to eat forever. And what you do is you tweak your protein up a little and your carbs and your fats down a little so that you're at a slight caloric deficit, maybe 300 calories a day, and you're just gradually cruising down to your ideal body weight and stay there. And you're leveraging higher protein and lower energy so that you're just slowly improving body composition, more lean mass, less fat mass, and you're doing it in a sustainable way, in an enjoyable way, in a way that you're not starving out of your mind, in a way that you're not tanking all your hormones. And so take wherever your diet is now, track it so you know actually what the hell you're eating, and then get your protein percent higher and your refined carbs and refined fats lower, but not insane. Don't go straight to egg whites and whey protein and that's it. You want to do this in a sustainable way so that you will slowly, gradually go down to your ideal body weight and enjoy the process the whole time and feel good.
So do the total calories matter if you're not hungry? For example, if you're getting high protein, low carbs, and lower fat and say 1,200 calories, but you're satiated, is that okay for, doing day after day?
That's totally okay. And what happens is the fatter people are, the longer they can go with low calories. You know what I mean? If you're like 500 pounds overweight, you could do a protein sparing modified fast and just eat 800 calories of protein. Like you could do that for weeks without being that hungry. But as you get leaner and leaner and leaner, you're just going to get hungrier and hungrier. You're going to have to up the calories more. And so it really scales up or down to how overfat you are. I will say that in people who are dangerously overfat and dangerously energy toxic, like if you have raging out of control diabetes and you're so awash with energy that your A1C is super high, yes, you should actually be on a protein sparing modified fast where you just eat the protein and you probably won't be that hungry and you will be able to do that for longer than most people. And you are just going to steadily burn off that extra energy. So it scales up or down with how overfat and energy toxic you are. And the worse off you are, the more you can get away with the protein sparing modified fast.